As with the two preceding scenes, naming and honoring the chosen one and evocation of the ancestors, the sources disagree about whether ritual action is primarily a women's or a men's dance. According to Kraft, the sage and elders have seated themselves at the end of evocation as a sort of hanging jury. Ritual action is then conceived as a women's scene. Of the ritual action of the ancestors, Stravinsky recalls only that he intended a type of ghost dance known to virtually all archaic communities, and that the women were to perform it while the men hovered at the sides marking time. The Hodson-Nijinsky choreography, in contrast, portrays the scene as basically a procession and circle dance for old men, the elders and the ancestors, all bearded and some wearing bearskins. The women remain seated until near the end of the scene, when they limp off stage. Through it all, the chosen one herself remains motionless at the center of the stage, as the men circle around her, menacing and taunting her. The music of this scene is basically a slow march. Freimeurer thinks of it as a Turkish march in the manner of the finale of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and there is certainly a flavor of the exotic East here, both in the quality of the march and the slinky chromatic melodies at the beginning and end of the scene. But I think it is more accurately described as a slow, solemn religious procession, a solemnization and consolidation of patriarchal power, consecrated by religious observance. The scene is in 5 sections in a retrograde symmetrical arrangement, A, B, C, B, A. The A sections are a slow march with exotic melodies. The B sections feature music closely associated with the sage and elders as they pronounce their sentence of doom on the chosen one. The C section, the central section, is a circle dance for old men. In the past, I have said that formal return is a mark of the pastoral, but here in this scene, it is clearly allied with the religious mode. The opening section unfolds quietly over a steady marching rhythm in the bass, reinforced with bass drum on the downbeats and tambourines on the offbeats in the manner of a Turkish march. Over the bass, we hear intermittent statements of 3 different chromatic melodies marked as exotic by their sinuous character in the manner of an arabesque. Following the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography, the previous scene was danced primarily by the young women, with the elders entering at the end to observe and pass judgment. At the beginning of this scene, the women seat themselves as the men rise and begin to circle around the chosen one, who remains motionless at the center of the stage. These are old men, sages, elders, and ancestors, all bearded, with some dressed in bearskins. The scene might have been titled The Procession of the Old Men. The opening section unfolds quietly over a steady marching bass, over which we hear the first of several sinuous exotic chromatic melodies. The harmony layer is centered on B flat, but with D in the bass. It bears an affinity with the first religious procession in the ballet, in the center of Spring Rounds. The melody layer consists of a chromatic ascent through a major third, played by the English horn. I'll call it exotic melody number 1. Hill calls it a chromatic slither. The frame for the chromatic ascent is E, G flat, A flat, 024, with each of the major seconds filled in with their chromatic passing note. It is related to other whole tone-oriented melodies we have discussed, most obviously the sinuous 2-part counterpoint from the introduction to Part 2, with which it also shares an exotic oriental flavor. And both melodies ascend, a rare quality among the Rite's melodies. More broadly, exotic melody number one participates in a larger network of whole tones that guides and shapes the melodies throughout part two, tracing a stepwise ascent through whole tone zero. In the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography for Block 2, the elders and ancestors parley with each other on the perimeter of the circle, while the chosen one remains motionless at the center of the circle, as indeed she does throughout the scene. Musically, the slow march continues in the harmony layer, and so do intermittent statements of exotic melody number one. Over the slow march, a new melody, exotic melody number two, is added, with some of the same slinky, chromatic, and oriental quality of exotic melody number one. This is music for the old men, but while it exoticizes them, it also feminizes them. The melody moves within an A-flat D frame, divided at 0-3-6. At the end, C-flat substitutes for C as an arrival tone, and it sounds a bit like a shift from major, A-flat major, to minor, A-flat minor. The only other time in the ballet when we have heard that particular harmonic relationship was back in the introduction to part one, at the transposition of the opening tune down a semitone at the end of the scene. This association reinforces the feminine quality of the melody. The prominent repeated CD at the top of exotic melody number two strongly recalls the chant-like alternation of those tones in the previous scene. In the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography for Block 3, the ancestors and elders bow to the center of the circle where the chosen one stands immobile. The harmony layer is reduced to a plodding B-flat D, and the two exotic melodies have dropped out. In place of exotic melodies 1 and 2, we get a new melody above the marching bass, exotic melody number 3. Kraft refers to it as snake charming. It moves within a Dorian tetrachord, B, C sharp, D, E, and it snakes along through the remaining blocks of the first section of this scene. It is scored for alto flute, creating a sonic association with the Mystic Circle's second theme that enhances its mysterious, dark, feminine quality. Exotic melody number 3 also refers to the old woman's music from the introduction to part 1, linking these two female-coded melodies that share an otherworldly quality. As we approach the end of the ballet, the references to its opening scenes intensify. In terms of clock time, The ballet began in the darkness before dawn and ends at roughly the same time. The musical connections between the beginning and end of the ballet simultaneously reflect their temporal commonality and provide a measure of the dramatic distance that has been traversed. This part of the scene is dominated by a melody closely associated with the sage's melody from part one. I'll call it the sentence of doom. The sage and the elders dance in their own small circles, and when their sentence of doom gets loudest, they advance menacingly toward the chosen one. In the harmony layer of block 4, we have the same slow trudging procession as in the previous blocks. Exotic melody number 3 continues to murmur. Over it, a new melody is heard, the sentence of doom pronounced upon the chosen one by the sage and elders. The march harmony has intensified with the addition of B natural, a semitone above the root B flat. As usual, the distractor is in the bass, recalling many similar harmonies throughout the ballet, including the augur's chord. Exotic melody number 3, Kraft's Snake Charmer, continues from the previous block, and as it murmurs along in steady 16th notes, a new melody is heard above it, played in triple octaves by trumpets and trombone. Although the new melody enters piano e tranquillo, it will soon grow furious and menacing, and I will call it the sentence of doom. Hodson calls it the repellent dance of the shorter ancestors, that is, those old men who are not privileged to wear bearskins. With small detours and embellishments, it traces 2 slow descents through its Dorian tetrachord, C sharp B, A sharp G sharp. The sentence of doom is a virtual reprise of the sage's melody from Procession of the Oldest and Wisest in part 1, and both melodies recall the transposition of the initial folk melody at the end of the introduction to part 1. Dramatically, the sentence of doom is pronounced by the sage, the elders, and the ancestors. The melody also relates via fixed dyad voice leading to the second of the exotic melodies from earlier in this scene. The feminized exotic and the masculinized violent assertion of patriarchal power are 2 related aspects of these mysterious, murderous old men. The block as a whole is almost purely octatonic. Although this connection is not a systematic aspect of the musical drama, the traditional association of the octatonic with the supernatural and the exotic seems to be operating here in relation to these ghostly ancestors. In Block 5, the plodding chords continue. Exotic melody number 3, Kraft's Snake Charmer, continues to murmur, and the sentence of doom has been reduced to little stabs of its lowest two notes, G sharp, A sharp. Above these continuing layers, we get a ghostly recall of the sinuous two-part counterpoint from the introduction to Part 2. This music was characterized by Taruskin as charm music. That music and all three exotic melodies, including Kraft's Snake Charmer, have a beguiling, fascinating quality. The elders and ancestors are entrancing and mesmerizing the chosen one, holding her immobile, charming her into passivity. There's something seductive about these melodies. They are both entrancing and repellent, beguiling and menacing. At this transposition level, the sinuous counterpoint melody provides the upper half of the momentarily absent sentence of doom. Charm and doom are two related aspects of the way the old men approach the young woman they intend to murder. Block 6 is dominated by the sentence of doom, which Nijinsky referred to as the repellent dance of the ancestors as they close in on the chosen one, laughing with their hands as though to disown her. Alongside the sentence of doom, now played by French horns with bells in the air, the texture is thickened with counterpoints and an increasingly dense harmonic layer. A new countermelody, in trumpet and trombone, embeds the same tetrachord, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, and extends it to a full Dorian collection. There are two additional strands in the melodic layer projecting two Dorian tetrachords related at T6, a paradigmatic octatonic arrangement. The lower strand coincides with the sentence of doom. The music strongly recalls the moment at the end of the two rival tribes where the women's entreaty clashes with the music that heralds the entrance of the sage. The sage, the elders, and the ancestors are thus represented by a nexus of musical elements, a melody within G sharp, C sharp, an opposing melody within D, G, and the octatonic collection that contains both of them. In the harmony layer, the march continues, but now the harmony has thickened and reoriented toward G. B flat and D are there, as they have been from the beginning of the scene. So is B, which joined in Block 3. The harmony now is oriented towards G major or G minor, with the distractor C sharp in the bass. This central section of the scene is basically a circle dance for old men. As they circle around, the still motionless chosen one. In the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography for Block 7, this is the moment when the ancestors form one big circle around the chosen one and frighten her. The old men's circle dance is in two parts. First, a chromatic descent within an 0-4 frame, and then an outline of 0257 as a cadential tag. Hodson identifies the cadential tag as the laughter of the old men as they scorn their sacrificial victim, and indeed the whole melody has the feeling of brutal mockery. The first part of the melody resonates with the exotic melodies from earlier in the scene. All of the melodies in the scene represent aspects of these murderous old men. The second part of the melody resonates in a different way with previous 0257 bass melodies, like the main tune of the Mystic Circle. In that case, the resemblance signals a radical transformation of expressive mode. The old men's circle dance melody is doubled an octave below and also has a planing accompaniment, mostly a major third or a minor sixth below, 4 semitones or 8 semitones. The bass alternates two perfect fifths, D-A and C-sharp, G-sharp. Taken together with the melody and its planing accompaniment, we get the progression D major, C-sharp major, D minor. The semitone distractors attached to each triad produce a progression of 3 tetrachords of the same type. Block 8 is mostly the same as Block 7, but everything is transposed up a minor third. The transposition of the old men's circle dance up by minor third intensifies their mockery and cruel laughter. The whole tribe now circles around the chosen one, and all share in the now overpowering sentence of doom, played in unison by 4 French horns with their bells in the air. The scene's main melody, the sentence of doom, returns. The sentence of doom now appears with a new countermelody. The countermelody is entirely regular, 4 groups of 4 beats. The sentence of doom itself, however, is a bit more complicated melodically, although it does move into conformity with the strict countermelody for its last 2 statements. The harmony layer is a polychord with B-flat oriented and C-oriented components. Everything in the passage is referable to octatonic 1-2, except the bass note C. The intensity gradually subsides. The elders and ancestors march in a large, slow circle around the chosen one as the young women limp off stage. According to Hodson, the limping dance is the departing act of the maidens. Afterwards, only men watch the sacrificial dance. The contortions of the maiden's initial limping gestures are a formal expression of distress about the chosen one, who is one of them, even though they had to alienate her in the glorification and evocation. The final limping gestures are a hieratic development of arms from the maiden's first group action, signifying their acceptance of the chosen one's fate. Block 10 is mostly the same as blocks 1 and 2. A little chromatic tag leads to the shattering final scene.